The night was heavy, darker than any the village had known. The moon hid behind clouds, and the wind refused to move the leaves. Only the shadows stretched long across the red earth, alive in a way no one could explain. And in the center of that silence stood a young woman, Naledi, her face pale with fear, her lips trembling as she whispered into the dark. What answered her was not the voice of man or beast, but the deep murmur of shadows themselves. They spoke of secrets, of betrayals hidden in plain sight, of dangers waiting in her own home. The villagers, watching from their huts, clutched their chests and crossed themselves, for they had never seen a girl speak to what should not speak back. That was the night fear first entered the village. That was the night they began to call her the Cursed One. My friends, if you wish to hear this tale to its end, stay close. Stories like this carry lessons as old as the soil beneath our feet. If you are ready for shadows that whisper and a girl who must choose between truth and peace, then sit with me until the last word. And if this tale stirs your heart, do not forget to share it so our circle grows wider, and subscribe to join us again when the next fire is lit. Now, let us return to the story. Naledi was not born cursed. She was born in a small village where the air smelled of roasted maize in the mornings and of smoke curling from cooking fires at night. Her laughter was light, carrying across the fields as she chased the other children through the tall grass. She was the daughter of Bantu, a humble potter, and Larato, a weaver of mats so fine that even traders from the next town would bargain hard to take them home. Their hut was modest but filled with love, and Naledi's voice was often heard singing small songs as she worked beside her mother or carried water from the stream. But Naledi was not like the others. She had always been quiet, her dark eyes noticing what others missed. A bird that landed only once on the same branch, a neighbor's hushed quarrel through the wall, the way the wind shifted before the rains. While others laughed and ran, she lingered in stillness, listening, watching. Her friends sometimes teased her, saying she carried too many thoughts for one so young. But Naledi only smiled, for she knew that silence often spoke louder than words. The first time she heard the shadows, she was 12 years old. It was late, and the village slept. She lay awake on her mat, staring at the flickering light of the fire as it died. That was when she heard it, a low whisper curling from the corner of the hut where the firelight did not reach. At first, she thought it was the voice of her mother, but when she turned, Larato slept soundly, her breath steady and deep. Again, the whisper came, soft and deliberate, as if someone were calling her name from a place no one could see. Naledi, her heart pounded, but instead of covering her ears, she answered. Her voice was no more than a breath. Who is there? Silence. And then, like the shifting of dry leaves, the shadows spoke again. I am what you do not see. I am what you tried to forget. I am the truth beneath your feet. Naledi pulled the blanket to her chin, trembling. Why do you speak to me? She asked. The shadow did not answer directly. Instead, it told her something she could not understand. It whispered of her father's pot, the one he had just sold in the market that day. It will break, it said, not by accident, but by envy. She shook her head, pressing her palms to her ears. But no matter how tightly she covered them, the words seeped through. The next morning, when the neighbor's child came running to say that Bantu's pot had been shattered in the market, not by clumsiness but by a jealous rival, Naledi froze. The whisper had been true. From that day forward, Naledi carried a weight inside her. The shadows spoke to her often, telling her small truths, warnings, secrets no one else knew. At first, she told no one. Who would believe a girl who claimed that shadows carried voices? But with every whisper that proved itself true, she began to wonder, was this a gift meant to protect her, or a curse meant to destroy everything she loved? At first, Naledi tried to keep the voices a secret. When they whispered, she would turn her face away, pretending to be deaf. But the shadows had patience. They waited in corners, behind pots, under mats, and in the edges of moonlight. They spoke softly until she listened, then grew louder if she tried to ignore them. Sometimes they told her small things, where the chickens had wandered, which path her mother should take to avoid the snake near the stream. These things seemed harmless, even helpful, but soon, the whispers grew heavier, sharper, like knives slicing through the calm of the village. One night, while she sat by the fire weaving with her mother, the shadows stirred against the wall and hissed, "Your uncle steals from your father's jars of grain. Naledi's hands froze. Her eyes darted to Lorado, who hummed softly, unaware. When she finally dared to look at her father's brother, sitting just outside with a calabash of beer, she saw the nervous twitch of his fingers and realized the whispers spoke true. She said nothing, but the knowledge burned inside her like a coal. It did not end there. The shadows began to spill secrets Naledi had never asked for. Which husband struck his wife when no one looked? Which neighbor wished harm on the chief? Which child hid a stolen bracelet beneath the sleeping mat? With every truth, the world seemed darker, more fragile. Naledi wanted to bury it all, but truth has a way of demanding to be seen. The more she held it in, the more restless the shadows became. They whispered louder, hissing her name in the middle of the night until she sat trembling, clutching her knees. They begged her to speak. They told her she was chosen. Finally, one evening, her secret slipped. The villagers had gathered for the moon festival, their drums echoing into the night. Naledi sat with the other girls, clapping her hands to the rhythm. But as she watched her uncle dance, she remembered the whispers. Before she could stop herself, she turned to her friend and whispered back, "His feet are quick, but his hands are quicker. He steals from my father's jars." Her friend's eyes widened, and by morning, the words had spread like fire on dry grass. When Banta checked the jars and found them lighter than they should have been, suspicion turned into anger. The uncle denied it, swore upon his ancestors, but the village already whispered behind his back. His shame burned hotter than any punishment, and though Naledi had not spoken publicly, everyone soon believed she was the one who knew. From then on, eyes followed her. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men lowered their voices when she passed, and even her friends grew distant. They called her the ear of the shadows, half in fear, half in awe. Some came to her secretly, asking if the shadows had spoken about their families. Others avoided her altogether, fearing she might know too much. Naledi, still only a girl, felt the weight of truth pressing harder than stone. She begged the shadows to leave her, to let her be ordinary again. But they whispered even more now, sensing her desperation. They told her things she never wanted to know: who would die before the next harvest, which marriage would collapse, who plotted against whom. One night, Naledi ran to the edge of the village, tears streaming down her face. She stood beneath the baobab tree, fists clenched, and shouted into the darkness, "Why me? Why must I carry your voices? I am no elder, no healer. I am just a girl." The wind stirred, and from the ground where her shadow lay stretched long, the voices rose as one. "Because you listen." The words chilled her bones. She had thought she was chosen, but now she understood. The shadows had chosen her not because she was special, but because she was willing to hear what others refused to hear. She sank to her knees. For the first time, Naledi wished she had been born deaf. From that night forward, the whispers grew darker. They no longer warned her of snakes or thieves. They spoke of betrayals that had not yet happened, tragedies waiting in silence. One whispered of her mother's death, another of her father's disgrace. She clutched her ears, but the shadows crept closer, until even in her dreams, she could not escape them. The girl who had once laughed in the tall grass no longer laughed. She became quiet, withdrawn, her eyes always heavy, as if carrying a weight no child should bear. The village, too, shifted. The people's fear of Naledi began to curdle into something sharper: suspicion. And suspicion, when fed, grows into danger. The sun rose over the village one morning, but its light seemed hesitant, as though it too feared what had taken root in the hearts of the people. Naledi stayed inside her hut, her knees drawn to her chest, the whispers pressing against her temples like the rhythm of a drum she could not escape. Her mother called her to help with the mats, but Naledi shook her head, mumbling that she had work to do in her own thoughts. Even Bantu, usually gentle and steady, glanced at her with worry, sensing the invisible weight she carried. He did not ask, for he knew that some truths, once spoken, could never be unsaid. It was that afternoon when it first happened. A stranger came to the village, a tall man with skin like polished ebony and eyes sharp as a hawk's. He carried nothing but a leather satchel and a staff carved with symbols Naledi did not recognize. He walked straight to the center of the village, where the women were trading beads and woven baskets, and spoke in a voice that was both calm and commanding. "I seek the girl who hears what others cannot." The crowd parted as if the wind itself moved them. Mothers clutched their children, men squared their shoulders, and all eyes turned to Naledi. Her heart hammered. She had heard of travelers who could sense power, but never had she imagined one would come for her. The stranger knelt slightly, meeting her gaze. "I have traveled far. The shadows speak to you, do they not?" Naledi's lips trembled, but she nodded. The whispers inside her seemed to lean closer, curious, warning, urging her to speak. "Yes, but they do not stop. They do not rest. They want me to see things I should not." He smiled faintly, a smile that held secrets rather than warmth. "That is because you are their vessel, and vessels are not meant to hide in the shadows. They are meant to carry the truth into the light." Fear and anger twisted in her chest. "I did not choose this. I never asked for it." The man rose, his staff tapping the red earth, leaving lines in the dust like ancient runes. "No one chooses when the gift finds them, but the choice you do have is what to do with it. The shadows do not punish, they reveal. It is the living who destroy themselves through fear." Naledi felt a tremor in her stomach. She wanted to flee, to run as far as the river ran and never look back. But the shadows whispered, and this time, their tone was urgent, almost pleading. "Listen, learn, protect, or all will fall." That night, she could not sleep. Her mind replayed the stranger's words, the village's fear, her mother's gentle hands weaving mats that could never shield her from what was coming. And then the whisper spoke again, not of petty theft or small betrayals, but of something vast, something that stretched beyond the borders of her home. "There is a darkness," they said, "that moves like a tide. It will reach the village before the next moon. Only you can stop it, if you are brave enough to speak." Naledi shivered. The weight she carried had grown heavier than ever before. She thought of the villagers, of her father's trembling hands, of her mother's soft voice trying to soothe her. Could she risk telling them? Would they even understand? Or would they brand her a witch, a bringer of doom? The next day, the stranger returned. He did not speak to the villagers. Instead, he went straight to Naledi's hut and said simply, "Prepare yourself. You will need to journey beyond the lands you know, to places the shadows themselves fear to tread. There, you will learn what the whispers cannot tell you alone." Naledi's eyes widened. "Leave the village? Alone? I cannot." "You are not alone," he said, placing a hand over her own. "The shadows have chosen you because they trust you. Now, you must trust yourself." And as the sun dipped low, painting the red earth with streaks of gold and fire, Naledi felt a strange resolve rising within her. For the first time since the voices had begun, she felt that her burden, terrifying as it was, might also be her path. She would step beyond fear, she would step beyond the village, and she would face whatever darkness the shadows had whispered about. For she was Naledi, the girl who spoke to shadows, and now, perhaps, the one who could command them. The night came again, deep and expectant, as if the land itself held its breath. Shadows swirled around her hut, whispering in voices that no one else could hear. But this time, she did not shrink from them. She listened, she nodded, and she whispered back. "Yes," she said, "I will go." The whispers softened, almost relieved, and the village, unaware of the storm to come, slept on red earth, waiting unknowingly for the girl who had been chosen to walk into darkness. The morning air was sharp as Naledi stepped beyond the village gates, her bare feet stirring the red dust. The sun had not yet fully risen, and the world seemed hushed, as if it too was waiting for what was to come. The stranger walked beside her, silent and steady, his staff tapping a rhythm into the earth that seemed to echo the beating of her heart. For hours they walked, leaving behind the fields of maize and the familiar smoke of cooking fires. The shadows, which had clung to her in the village, seemed to stretch along the path ahead, twisting and turning like living things, guiding her steps without revealing the way. Naledi's mind raced. Every whisper she had ever heard pressed against her thoughts, reminding her of the weight she carried. She thought of her parents, of the hut that would be empty when she returned, of the villagers who feared and revered her in equal measure. "You will face them soon," the stranger said without looking at her. "The first test lies in the forest of murmurs. The shadows there are not like the ones you know. They do not speak of theft or lies. They speak of fear, the kind that lives in your bones. Only those who can see clearly will pass." Naledi swallowed hard. Fear lived in her bones already. She had felt it every night since the whispers had begun. But this was different. It was something that whispered of loss and despair, yet also hinted at a truth she could not yet name. The forest appeared suddenly, as if conjured by the horizon itself. Dark trees stretched high, their canopies twisting together until no sunlight touched the ground. The air was thick, scented with moss and the faint, metallic tang of something old. Shadows clung to every trunk, every root, and whispered like a chorus of voices she had never heard before. "Step carefully," the stranger warned. "They feed on doubt. Speak only when you are certain, and do not look away." Naledi nodded, clutching the small satchel he had given her, which contained only a bit of water, a piece of cloth, and a smooth stone. As she entered the forest, the whispers began immediately, not the familiar soft tones, but a roar of voices, all trying to pull her in different directions. "Turn back. You are not ready. They will devour you." Her breath quickened, and her legs trembled, but she forced herself to take a step forward. The shadows shifted, forming shapes that resembled faces she knew, her father's stern look, her mother's worried eyes, even her uncle's shamed expression. And each face whispered its own fear. Naledi gritted her teeth. "I am not afraid of you," she shouted, though her voice trembled. The forest echoed her words, twisting them, mocking them. "Then prove it," the stranger said softly behind her. "Speak to what frightens you most. Only then will you see the truth." The whispers grew louder, and in the center of the path, a shadow formed, a tall, dark figure, faceless, with arms stretched wide. Naledi froze. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to hide, to cover her ears. But then she remembered the nights she had spent listening, the secrets she had carried, the truths she had faced. She drew a shaky breath and stepped forward. "I see you," she whispered. "I see that you are fear. But I am not alone. I am not weak. I am Naledi, and I will not be swallowed by what I know." For a moment, the shadow wavered. The forest held its breath. And then, slowly, the shape dissolved into a swirl of light and darkness, leaving only silence. Naledi sank to her knees, trembling, tears streaking her dust-covered face. The stranger knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You have passed the first trial," he said, "but many more await. Fear is only the beginning. Soon, the shadows will demand not just courage, but sacrifice." She nodded, trying to steady herself. The path ahead was unknown, the forest still dense and unwelcoming, but for the first time, Naledi felt a flicker of power within her, the power of seeing, of understanding, of standing when the world and its shadows demanded she fall. As they continued deeper into the forest, the whispers softened, following her like wind through leaves. And somewhere, far ahead, a deeper darkness waited, patient and hungry, knowing that the girl who spoke to shadows had begun her journey, and that the world itself would never be the same. The forest deepened with every step. Sunlight no longer pierced the thick canopy, and the air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decay. The whispers followed Naledi constantly, curling around her thoughts like smoke, now more insistent than ever. They spoke not of petty lies or stolen grain, but of choices, of power, of the cost of truth. The stranger moved beside her in silence, his staff tracing patterns along the mossy ground, leaving faint trails that shimmered briefly before fading. He did not intervene as shadows darted across the path, taking the shapes of animals, or mimicking the villagers' faces, each whispering a temptation, a doubt, a fear. Naledi's pulse quickened. She had expected fear, but not this. It was as if the forest itself were alive, testing her at every step, trying to unbalance her mind. Then, in a sudden clearing, it appeared, the first true trial. A pool of black water lay before her, still as glass yet rippling with movement beneath its surface. Shadows swirled in the depths, forming faces, hands, shapes too sharp to describe. And rising from the center was a single figure, taller than any man, cloaked in darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its voice echoed in her mind rather than through her ears. "Why do you walk here, little one? What makes you think you deserve what you cannot understand?" Naledi froze. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to retreat to the safety of her village. But the whispers inside her chest, the ones she had carried for years, pushed her forward. "Face it, speak, or be consumed." She took a shaky breath. "I walk here because the shadows chose me, because the voices speak through me, and I will not let fear rule the living." The figure laughed, a sound like cracking timber. "Brave words, but do you know what you ask? To face me is to see yourself, to see what lies hidden even from your own heart." The shadows in the pool writhed violently, pulling her reflection from the water, twisting it into grotesque forms, a version of herself with hollow eyes. A version with her mother's face crying, a version with her father broken and shamed. Naledi's stomach turned, her voice caught. "You cannot frighten me with what is already in my heart," she whispered, though her knees shook. The shadow leaned closer, as if inspecting her soul. "Then choose. Do you take the truth, with all its pain and burden, or do you turn back, leaving the shadows to speak for themselves?" Naledi felt the weight of every secret she had ever heard, every betrayal, every injustice. The forest seemed to lean closer, demanding an answer. She thought of the village, of her mother weaving mats in quiet devotion, of her father's hands, scarred from clay and labor, of the people who feared her yet depended on her in ways they could not name. "I take it," she said finally, her voice stronger now. "I take the truth, no matter the cost. I will bear it, and I will use it to protect those who cannot see it themselves." For a long moment, the shadows stilled. Then the dark figure bowed, dissolving into ripples of light that raced across the pool and up into the trees. The forest seemed to breathe again, the whispers quieting into soft murmurs of approval. The stranger, who had watched silently, nodded. "You have passed the second trial," he said, "but this is only the beginning. The shadows do not yield their secrets easily. There are powers in this world that will test not just your courage, but the strength of your heart. And soon, you will face one that is older than the earth itself." Naledi looked at the black water, the forest, the path ahead. Her legs ached, her chest burned with the effort of standing firm against fear. But something had changed. She felt a clarity she had never known, a quiet command over the voices that had once tormented her. The whispers, now gentler, trailed around her, like the brush of wings. "We will guide you. We trust you. Do not fail yourself." Naledi took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the path that stretched into darkness. She had chosen, and for the first time, the shadows felt less like a weight and more like allies, waiting for her to lead them. And as night fell over the forest of murmurs, the girl who spoke to shadows stepped forward into the unknown, ready to meet the darkness that awaited, and the truth that could change not just her life, but the fate of the village she had left behind. The forest had grown darker, heavier, as if the trees themselves bent closer to watch her every step. Naledi's heart pounded, but this time, the rhythm was steady with determination rather than fear. She knew the shadows were guiding her, yet the weight of what lay ahead pressed on her chest like a stone. Suddenly, the path ended. Before her was a clearing shrouded in black mist that seemed to drink the very light around it. From the mist, a figure emerged, taller and broader than any man she had seen. Its body was made entirely of shadows, writhing and shifting like smoke in the wind. Its eyes were deep hollows, and its voice rolled through her mind like thunder. "Little one," it intoned, "you walk where no living soul dares. Do you know what you face?" Naledi's lips trembled, but she stepped forward. "I do, and I will not turn back." The shadow laughed, a sound like breaking wood and rushing water. "You are brave, but bravery alone will not save you. To pass, you must confront what you fear most." Images flashed before her eyes, her parents suffering, her village destroyed, her friends lost. Shadows took the faces of those she loved, twisting them into screams that clawed at her mind. The whispers inside her head screamed too, trying to distract, to overwhelm. Naledi clenched her fists. "I see you," she whispered. "I see your lies, your darkness, and I will not be afraid. I am Naledi, the girl who listens, who sees, who speaks." The shadow recoiled, shifting violently, as though surprised by the force of her words. Then it split into many smaller shadows, each darting toward her, testing her will. They whispered every secret she had ever known, every fear she had tried to bury, every doubt she had about herself. For a moment, she staggered, nearly falling to the ground. But then she remembered the stranger's words. "Trust yourself. The shadows chose you because you can bear what others cannot." She raised her voice, steady and firm. "I am not yours. I am mine, and I will use what I know to protect, not to destroy." The shadows shrieked, a sound that tore through the forest, and for a heartbeat, Naledi feared she had failed. But slowly, the darkness began to dissolve, breaking into thin wisps that floated upward like smoke. The figure at the center knelt, its hollow eyes softening, and then it spoke one last time. "You have strength. You have heart. But remember this, the shadows are not your enemies. They are your guide, and soon, the choice you make will not be only for yourself." The black mist dissipated, leaving the clearing empty, save for Naledi and the faint whisper of the wind. Her legs shook, her chest burned, but a new clarity had settled over her. The shadows had tested her, and she had faced the darkness inside herself and emerged unbroken. The stranger reappeared at the edge of the clearing, his eyes calm but serious. "You have done well," he said, "but the true challenge is yet to come. The village you left behind will soon face the threat the shadows warned of, and only you can prepare them, guide them, and stand between them and what waits in the dark." Naledi nodded, exhaustion and resolve mixing in her chest. She knew the journey had only just begun. The shadows had chosen her, yes, but now it was her choice, to wield the knowledge and power they had given her, or let the darkness claim everything she loved. The forest was silent, yet it hummed with possibility, and as the night pressed close, Naledi took her first step back toward the path that would lead her home, toward the village that would never be the same again. The village looked smaller from the hilltop where Naledi first saw it, the red earth glowing faintly in the moonlight. Smoke still curled from cooking fires, children laughed in the distance, and women tended their baskets as if nothing had changed. Yet she knew better. The shadows had warned her. Something was coming, something that would bring ruin if she was not ready. As she stepped closer, the whisper stirred in her mind. "Watch. Listen. They are blind to what approaches." Her father's hut appeared first. Bantu was outside, checking the drying clay pots. Unaware of the tension in the air, her mother, Larado, hummed softly, weaving mats beside the fire. Naledi's chest tightened. She had returned, but she carried knowledge no one else could see, knowledge heavy as stone. Suddenly, the whispering grew louder, frantic, urgent. Shadows twisted across the ground, forming shapes that raced toward the village. Naledi's eyes widened as she realized the truth. It was not just human enemies who threatened them, but a force the villagers could never comprehend. A dark, creeping presence that moved like smoke, consuming light wherever it touched. "They will not see it," she murmured to herself. "Only I can." The stranger appeared behind her, silent as ever. "The village will resist at first. They do not understand what you have learned. You must guide them, but do not force them. Fear can destroy faster than any shadow." Naledi nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. How could she convince them of something they could not see? Her mind raced as she moved through the village, whispering warnings to the few she trusted. Mothers pulled their children closer, men lowered their heads. Some laughed nervously, thinking it a child's imagination. But soon, the creeping darkness became visible, a low mist rolling in from the forest edge, thick and unnatural. Smoke twisted into shapes that whispered threats, bent the branches unnaturally, and snuffed out lanterns as it passed. The villagers finally saw it, and terror erupted. "Run! Run!" they shouted. Mothers gathered their children. Men grabbed spears and sticks. But panic spread faster than any preparation. Naledi stepped forward, raising her hands, calling into the shadows. "Stop!" Her voice rang clear, commanding, echoing in the minds of the living and the unseen alike. "This darkness obeys me as much as it obeys what is hidden. Stand with me, or it will consume all." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, the whispers of the shadows in her mind shifted, aligning with her intent. She spoke again, slowly, deliberately. "See me, hear me. The shadow cannot touch those who understand it. Stand with me, and I will guide you through the night." Some villagers froze, others hesitated, but one by one, they began to trust her, just enough. Bantu placed his hand on her shoulder, a silent vow of belief. Lorado held a child close, whispering prayers while watching her daughter. The shadows paused as if testing her control, then surged forward. Naledi stepped into the mist, the whispers in her head a chorus guiding her movements. She reached out, and the darkness recoiled at her voice. Her certainty, the light she carried in her understanding. For hours, she worked with the shadows, shaping them, controlling them, using the knowledge they had given her to protect rather than destroy. By dawn, the mist had receded to the forest edge, and the village was unharmed, though shaken. The villagers looked at Naledi with a mixture of awe and fear. They had seen her power, the ability to command what should not be commanded. Some bowed their heads in respect, others whispered prayers, and a few stared with suspicion that might never fade. Naledi's chest heaved, exhaustion pressing down on her, but she felt something else now, strength. She had faced the darkness, guided her people, and survived. Yet the shadows murmured warnings still. This was only the beginning. Greater trials await. Greater darkness lies ahead. Naledi looked toward the forest, where the mist had receded, and knew their journey was far from over. But for now, she had won a battle, and the village remained. She had spoken to shadows, and they had answered. And in that moment, she understood. The burden she bore was not just a curse. It was a shield, a path, and perhaps the only hope the village had. The village awoke to a quiet that felt heavy, as if the night had left a shadow lingering in every corner. Mothers whispered warnings to their children, and men patrolled the boundaries, eyes sharp, hearts uneasy. Yet despite the apparent calm, Naledi could feel the pulse of something darker lurking beyond the hills, a presence older and more patient than anything she had faced in the forest of murmurs. The stranger returned at dawn, his staff tracing lines in the red earth. "The threat you faced yesterday," he said, "was only the beginning. What you call shadows are merely the sentinels." Naledi felt a chill crawl along her spine. The whispers inside her head stirred uneasily, blending with the sounds of the waking village. It waits. It watches. It tests. Her father approached, concern etched into every line of his face. "Naledi, what is it this time?" he asked, his voice low. She met his eyes, the knowledge weighing on her. "Something is coming, father. Something that even the shadows fear. We must prepare." The villagers gathered as she spoke, their faces a mixture of fear, awe, and disbelief. Naledi raised her hands, calling on the whispers within her. Slowly, the shadows of the village responded, stretching along the walls, twisting around trees, forming protective barriers that were invisible to the untrained eye. A tremor passed through the ground, subtle but undeniable, as the first sign of the greater darkness emerged. From the horizon, a black wave rolled forward, not water, not mist, but a living shadow, pulsating, twisting, growing. It consumed the light as it moved, devouring everything in its path. Naledi's heart pounded. She realized this was no longer a test of courage alone. It was a battle of understanding, of control, of balance. She had to guide not just the villagers but the shadows themselves, shaping the darkness to prevent it from consuming the innocent. The stranger placed his hand on her shoulder. "Remember, Naledi, fear is its weapon. Knowledge is yours. Use it, command it, protect your people." As the darkness reached the edge of the village, Naledi closed her eyes, letting the whispers flow through her mind. She spoke aloud. Each word deliberates, firm, commanding. "You will not pass. You will not harm those under my protection. I see you. I understand you. And I will guide you where you cannot go alone." The darkness shuddered, as if stunned by her declaration. Then it surged, faster and stronger. Shadows twisted around her, whispering guidance, warning her of weaknesses, showing her the ways the darkness tried to infiltrate. Naledi moved, directing both the villagers and the shadows like a conductor leading an orchestra. Sparks of light appeared where her voice touched the darkness, creating barriers, corridors of safety. Villagers, initially frozen in fear, began to follow her commands, moving as one under her guidance. Mothers shielded their children behind her. Men braced spears where the shadows wavered, all under Naledi's quiet authority. Hours passed in what felt like moments. The darkness tested every part of her, her courage, her clarity, her understanding of the whispers. But Naledi did not falter. She had learned from every secret, every betrayal, every fear she had ever known. She had faced herself in the forest of murmurs. She had mastered the first wave of shadows, and now she mastered the darkness that threatened to consume her world. As the sun crept over the horizon, the living shadow finally recoiled, retreating toward the hills. The whispers softened, blending into a gentle hum of approval. The village was safe for now, and Naledi stood in the center, exhausted but unbroken. The stranger stepped forward, his face grave yet proud. "You have done well, but remember, Naledi, this darkness is patient. It will return, and when it does, it will test not only your strength but your heart. The choice you make then could decide the fate of everything you love." Naledi looked over her village, over the people who feared yet trusted her, and knew she was ready. The burden of shadows was no longer just a curse. It was a power she could wield, carefully, wisely, and with the courage to face what came next. The shadows whispered around her, not in fear, but in respect. "You are ready, but the greatest trial still waits." The sun had set, leaving the village cloaked in darkness that felt heavier than usual. The air was thick, as if holding its breath. and even the usual night sounds, crickets, distant calls of nocturnal birds, seemed muted. Naledi stood at the center of the village, her eyes closed, listening. The shadows whispered softly around her, a calm undercurrent after the storm of the previous night. But deep in the forest beyond the hills, a pulse stirred. It was older, stronger, and darker than any shadow Naledi had faced. It moved like liquid, winding around roots, snaking through trees, searching for the cracks in her resolve. The whispers hissed warnings in her mind. It comes. It tests everything. Only you can stand. The villagers, sensing the unease, gathered near the huts. Some looked to Naledi with fear, others with hope. They had witnessed her power, seen her command the shadows and protect them from the creeping darkness. Yet they did not fully understand what was coming, and that was how fear could grow fastest, in what is unseen. Naledi felt the stirrings in the air first, a cold wind that seemed to come from nowhere, rustling the mats, tugging at hair, curling smoke from the fires. She opened her eyes and saw it, a wave of pure darkness flowing across the land, twisting and pulsing with a life of its own. Its presence made the ground tremble beneath her feet. The whispers in her head roared, overlapping, urgent, demanding, focus, command, do not falter. She raised her hands, shaping the shadows around her. The village's boundaries shimmered with invisible walls, protective forms that only she could sense and direct. But this darkness was different. It resisted, writhing against her, testing her focus, feeding on fear. The stranger stepped beside her, staff in hand. This is it, Naledi, your final trial. If you falter, not just you, but the village, and perhaps everything beyond it, will be lost. Naledi swallowed, feeling the weight of every secret she had carried, every betrayal she had uncovered, every truth she had faced. I am ready, she told herself. I have faced fear. I have guided the shadows. I have protected those who cannot see. Now I will face this. The darkness surged forward, forming shapes she could almost recognize. The faces of the villagers twisted, distorted, calling out in silent screams. Testing her resolve, she held her ground, whispering commands, calling the shadows to her side. Hold, protect, push back, she said, her voice firm and steady. The shadows responded, coalescing into walls, barriers, and forms of protection, flowing like water through the village. For hours, they battled, Naledi moving with precision, guiding the shadows, listening to the whispers that now seemed like allies rather than burdens. Every misstep, every flicker of doubt, allowed the darkness to creep closer. Every command, every word spoken with clarity, pushed it back. At the peak of the struggle, the dark force formed a massive shape, taller than any tree, wider than the huts, and faced her directly. Its voice echoed in her mind. Child of whispers, you may command, but can you sacrifice? Naledi felt the question settle deep in her bones. She thought of the village, her parents, her friends, and the price of failure. She thought of the whispers, the shadows, and the lessons they had given her. And she answered, firm, I will bear any cost. I will face the darkness, and I will protect what I love. This is my choice. The shadows surged around her, forming a radiant barrier that met the darkness head-on. For a heartbeat, the world trembled. Then, with a sound like wind through mountains, the darkness shattered, dissolving into the forest like smoke in sunlight. The village fell silent. The whispers faded to a soft hum, a gentle approval that settled in her mind. Naledi's legs shook, her chest heaved, but she had stood. She had faced the ultimate shadow, mastered her gift, and protected her people. The stranger approached, his face solemn but proud. You have done what no one else could. You have faced fear, controlled the shadows, and guided those who could not see. The village is safe, for now, but remember, the shadows will always speak, and the balance of light and dark is never final. Naledi looked at the villagers, at her parents, at the familiar red earth beneath her feet. She realized something profound. The burden she had carried was no longer a curse. It was a gift, a responsibility, and a shield. She was no longer just the girl who listened to shadows. She was their voice, their guide, their protector. And though she knew challenges would come again, for the first time, she felt a calm certainty. She had faced the darkness and survived, stronger, wiser, and unafraid. The village woke the next morning to sunlight spilling over the red earth. painting the huts and fields in warm gold. Birds called from the trees. Children laughed as they chased one another through the maze, and smoke curled gently from the chimneys. Everything seemed ordinary, yet nothing was as it had been. Naledi stood at the edge of the village, her eyes tracing the horizon. The forest of murmurs loomed in the distance, silent and watchful, a reminder of the trials she had faced. The whispers that had once terrified her now flowed gently through her mind, offering guidance, wisdom, and companionship. She had learned their language, and in turn, they had learned hers. Her parents approached, Bantu's hands steady on her shoulders, Lorado's eyes filled with tears and pride. The villagers gathered, some still wary, some openly reverent, but all had witnessed the truth of her gift. You saved us," her father said quietly. Naledi shook her head. "No, we saved ourselves, together. The shadows only showed me the way." The stranger appeared one final time, his staff tapping softly against the earth. "You have done well, Naledi. You have faced fear, commanded what others could not, and guided those who did not see. The village will remember, and your story will live as long as the red earth beneath your feet." Naledi nodded, a quiet smile touching her lips. She realized the truth of his words. Her journey had changed her, yes, but it had also changed everyone around her. Fear had been met with courage, doubt with guidance, shadows with understanding, and in that balance, life endured. As the villagers returned to their daily tasks, Naledi walked to the village square, standing beneath the great baobab tree. She closed her eyes and listened. The whispers were soft, almost musical, reminding her of every secret, every warning, every truth she had carried. And now, they spoke of possibility, of hope, and of the responsibility she would continue to bear. She opened her eyes and spoke to the shadows for the last time. "For now, thank you. I will listen. I will guide. I will protect." A gentle wind swept through the village, rustling leaves, lifting dust, and carrying the faint echo of whispers into the morning sun. Naledi smiled. The girl who had once feared the voices in the dark was gone. In her place stood a young woman who had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And though the shadows would always speak, the village would always live, and Naledi would always walk between the worlds of light and dark, a bridge of understanding in a world that often feared what it could not see. Somewhere in the forest, the whispers stirred again, soft and patient, waiting for the next moment when guidance, courage, and truth would be needed, and Naledi, their chosen listener, would be ready. The story of the girl who spoke to shadows had reached its end, but the echoes of her journey would linger forever, in the wind, the trees, and the red earth beneath her feet.